A U.S. drone strike kills 7 in Yemen. A U.S. drone strike kills 6 in Pakistan. U.S. drone strikes in Afghanistan to continue. Does the U.S. have legal rights or the mandate to conduct these strikes? A U.S. government spokesperson has said that the U.S. drone war could last forever. In this edition of the debate, we'll discuss U.S.'s drone wars, many aspects of which are shrouded in secrecy, and why does it continue only in Muslim countries? And when it comes to Afghanistan, we'll ask our guests why it continues in that country when the U.S. has stated that it would end that war this year.
The U.S. has been carrying out a covert drone war in several Muslim countries over the past years, with claims of targeting militants and terrorists in the region. The U.S. drone operations have significantly surged since President Barack Obama took office 6 years ago. The high civilian casualties, though, contradict his inauguration address, in which Obama described the U.S. as a friend of each and every nation, man, woman, and child, who seeks a future of peace and dignity. Based on official reports, the increasing number of drone operations over the past years have mainly led to thousands of civilian deaths and the rise in anti-American sentiments in the region.
Well, they figure into their airstrikes that they are going to kill innocent people. This is part of the mathematical equation. And they are purposely shooting weaponry where they know innocent victims will die. And this is a war crime, and they should be held accountable by the UN, by the ICC. But as we see, the United States and its few coalition partners seem to be held up higher than the law.
According to a UN report published in February, the civilian deaths in Afghanistan tripled in 2013. The report has blamed U.S. drone attacks for at least a third of all civilian fatalities that year, adding the total could even be higher. America's numerous drone attacks on Pakistan's tribal region have also led to massive civilian casualties in recent years. A report published in October has revealed that only 4% of those killed in some 400 attacks along the tribal belt were militants. Similar drone operations have also claimed hundreds of Yemeni lives and brought into question the transparency of such airstrikes. And now a newly published report by the New York Times has cast even more doubt on Washington's real intentions of fighting terrorism. It in fact suggests that the CIA has been collaborating with the terrorists it claims to be fighting against. According to the report, the U.S. was well aware of a deadly 2007 bombing carried out by the outlawed Jundullah terrorist group in Iran's southeast. The war in Syria is also seen as another instance of Washington's support for terrorism. Over the past years, the U.S. and its regional allies provided militants with funds and military equipment with the aim of toppling the Syrian government. But years on, that support has led to the creation of the ISIL, which is known to be the richest and most notorious terrorist group in modern history, now in control of parts of Syria and Iraq. Experts say Western double standards regarding good and bad terrorists are nothing new, and that the West has always been open to militant violence as long as it serves its interests. They, however, say that times have changed, and the U.S. and its allies should know that such hypocritical policies would sooner or later backlash at home.
Joining us for this edition of the debate from the Answer Coalition, Brian Becker joins us from Washington, and intelligence and military historian Nigel West joins us from London. Gentlemen, welcome. Brian Becker, I'll start with you. And if you can please explain U.S.'s drone program and strikes in other countries, because the last time we checked, drone strikes, when they occur, that's when a country is at war with that country that's involved with.
Well, Bush and Cheney coined the phrase endless war after September 11th. And we see that since President Obama took office in 2009, more than 2,400, probably closer to 2,500 or 2,600 people have been killed by U.S. drone strikes. Of course, that's more than the number of U.S. soldiers who were killed in all of the Afghanistan war during the last 13 years. So we have a situation where the United States government arrogates to itself the right to carry out targeted assassinations against people or groups or entities in multiple countries, most of them right now, or all of them perhaps, being Muslim countries, certainly giving the perception that the endless war that was declared by Bush and Cheney and then has been essentially adopted by the Obama administration is an endless war against Muslim peoples and perhaps a war against Islam itself. I mean, that certainly is a perception. I think what really makes this very dangerous, a criminal act in an institutional way, is that the Obama administration and Bush before it exempted the American public from having to have a real debate about going to war. Because if all the bleeding is being done by the other side, if all of the wounded, if all of the so-called collateral damage, meaning the death of civilians, is being inflicted on the targeted countries, and the American people don't feel it at all, if the drone operators unleash their attack and then go home to their suburban homes in Maryland and Virginia for the weekend, then the body politic in America doesn't have to really debate the fact that the U.S. government is endlessly at war against enemies. And of course, as you suggested, people won't simply bleed and simply be killed and simply be victimized by drone attacks. There will be blowback, because that's the nature of life. That's the nature of things. So it's extremely dangerous. It's criminal. It has no transparency. It has no accountability. But it's becoming the weapon of choice by U.S. policymakers, both Republicans and Democrats.
Well, perhaps, Nigel West, if you have a reaction, I'll ask my question, but do you have a reaction to what Brian Becker said there?
Yes, I don't think that it's really very helpful to say that there's a war on Muslims. I mean, the reality is that Al-Qaeda killed far more of their own co-religionists than they did people visiting or Americans or coalition forces in the Middle East. So let's just put aside the idea that this is some kind of war against, war by Christians against Muslims. That's just not the case. I agree that there is a considerable debate to be had about the use of unmanned aerial vehicles. In the United Kingdom, we call them remotely piloted vehicles, big aircraft, because that's precisely what they are. Each of these, either Predators or Reapers, has 2 pilots. They are very attractive as an instrument either of intelligence collection or being able to be used as a platform to fire Hellfire missiles. They are used in airspace with the consent of the sovereign authority in that particular country. And of course, there are always going to be civilian casualties. That is to be deeply regretted. And I'm afraid that in every conflict, generally speaking, there are far more civilian casualties than military personnel. But having said that, as an instrument of eliminating terrorists, this is a very effective instrument. It's surgical in nature, based on as good intelligence as is available, and of course does not put at risk other lives of civilians, or indeed making the requirement to put boots on the ground.
Brian Becker, I think Nigel West there, maybe he didn't mean it, but directly puts the finger on this whole thing being so wrong, and that is the fact that he says that obviously there's going to be civilian casualties. Isn't that the approach that is fueling all this opposition towards these illegal assassination drones, as some are calling it, which has been deemed illegal by international law?
Yes, I think Nigel's expression is sort of a soulless platitude. Oh, of course there will be civilian casualties. That's the nature of war. But we're not at war. The U.S. government hasn't declared war in Somalia or Yemen or Pakistan. It's at war, clearly, in Afghanistan. But, you know, the U.S. government, in secret, the president, by the way, I'm hearing each of my words back in my ear. The president, in secret, sits with his advisors every week and decides who's going to be killed, who's going to be targeted, and they build into the calculation that there will be civilian casualties. There will be children or their moms or their grandparents, and that's just part of it. Well, the Geneva Convention, if you want to be legal and technical, the Geneva Convention prohibits military actions that don't explicitly take into account the protection of civilians, nearby civilians. But, you know, if you have people like Nigel who say, as many in the media do, well, there are always civilian casualties at war, so who gives a damn, really? And that's the true attitude, is that nobody really cares. Of course, if they were American kids being bombed, or
Brian,
British kids being bombed but you know what? If there were drone attacks against terrorists in the UK, by Pakistan or Yemen, and they happen to blow up some children who are not related, or even the terrorists themselves, there would be such a howl in UK. It's such an imperial sort of double standard here. It's okay to bomb, whether you call them Muslim countries or lesser developed countries or formerly colonized countries by the former colonial powers. It's really no big deal, is it, Nigel? It's really not a big thing to you. But Nigel? It would be if it was your own kids and your own neighbors.
Go ahead, Nigel West.
Can I just respond by referring to a review of British participation in the remotely piloted aircraft program? And in a review of all the strikes that have taken place, it turned out that there was only one where they were satisfied that there were civilian casualties. And that particular event was scrutinized. Well, can you let me finish? That in this particular...
yeah, finish. Go ahead. Finish.
Thank you. It's a British strike. And the vehicle that was hit by a missile, what was not understood was that the vehicle also was carrying munitions. And after the drone strike, which achieved its objective, there were then secondary explosions, and it was those secondary explosions which were unintended and unexpected, and they did cause civilian casualties. And of course, that is to be deeply, deeply regretted. But where there is going to be conflict, you may not like it very much, but unmanned aerial vehicles is an instrument that actually tends to reduce civilian casualties.
Well, you touched on a very good thing. We're going to head to comments, and I know that, Brian Recker, you have a reaction to Nigel West, but Nigel West, you touched on something that is part of the drone campaign warfare, that if a drone strike hits a few people that is thought to be extremists or terrorists, once these people are hit, if there are other people who want to come to aid and to the rescue of those that have been hit, the U.S. is obliged to carry through another strike to hit the people that are trying to help the ones that have been injured or killed. I've never seen that.
I've never seen that.
That is part of their. That's part of their strategy. It's been cited.
Nigel has just not read the literature on drone attacks. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, neither of them are anti-American, neither of them are anti-imperialist, have documented hundreds and hundreds of civilians, including hundreds of children, who have been blown away by drone strikes in many countries that the United States is at war with. This is well documented. In fact, their reports,
I'm not denying that there have been civilian casualties.
Real neutrality.
What conflict hasn't involved civilian casualties?
No, but you're so downplaying it, say the one incident in Afghanistan. It's just nonsense. I mean, read the literature, at least do some of the research.
I'm sorry, Brian. Listen to what I said. I said that this was a study of the British remotely piloted aircraft. I did not say that included American
We're talking about the phenomena. We're talking
strikes.
About a phenomena, and you're minimizing. You're minimizing what's actually happening. The fact of the matter is, without accountability and without legal authorization, the United Nations. Look, the United Nations Security Council nor the U.S. Congress has authorized the use of drone bombing attacks against countries without hesitation. That has not been authorized. Those are illegal. You can say, as the United States government says, who's a terrorist? I mean, check, you know, Patrice Lumumba was assassinated by the CIA in 1960. This didn't just start yesterday. And the president of Guatemala and people all over the world who have been targeted for decades by the United States. The only thing new is now they can do it with drone warfare. And that's what's happening.
Calm down.
Okay, let's calm down by taking a listen to some of the viewer comments. I'm sorry, gentlemen. Let's listen to some of the viewer comments, and we'll come back to the debate. Let's take a quick time out and listen to those comments now.
His drones are not killing terrorists. Instead, they are killing innocent children, women and men. I hope one day to see Obama rot in prison for his crimes against humanity. This is called legal terrorism. We are creating generations of people who despise the US. We are creating enemies. US should carry on. Great work. The British Empire and their puppet Obama will soon be history. They are destroying themselves. They were once the most admired nation on earth. Today, they are the most dangerous and hated. Even Americans hate their government. Instead of doing war, they should take care of their hungry, homeless and sick. Well, Boeing is trying to sell drones to the US armed forces. Thousands of Pakistani children have died, many are disabled. Were those children terrorists? Drones are not eradicating terrorism, but they promote terrorism. Killing innocent children in the name of terrorism is extremely shameful. The drone strikes are illegal, and the people that are responsible for the killings are war criminals. Imagine if they were carried out in the US or a NATO-allied country by anyone else. That would be construed as terrorism, and that someone else would be immediately blown to smithereens.
Some of the viewer comments there. All right, gentlemen, let me see. Let's start with you, Nigel West. You were talking, and Brian Becker, you could come anytime you'd like. Nigel West, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, on the subject of CIA assassinations, I'm not sure that Brian really knows his history, because if you look at the Pike and Church Committee hearings, there was not a single assassination conducted by the CIA in the entire review conducted by Pike and Church. Secondly, nobody was indicted or convicted of any crime as a result of that review. And it's a mythology that the CIA targeted for assassination the leaders of foreign countries. It is quite true that the Eisenhower administration wanted Patrice Lumumba dead, but actually it was the Belgians who killed him. And it doesn't matter whether you go to René Schneider in Chile or Fidel Castro in Cuba. The fact is that Castro is still alive, and René Schneider, we know, was not assassinated by the CIA. So the proposition that the CIA assassinates people overseas is just simply not true.
Brian Becker.
I think Nigel just would be like an army of one on this one. I mean, the whole world knows, and the Church Committee hearings, by the way, while they didn't result in criminal convictions, because after all, it's the U.S. government investigating itself, did clearly acknowledge that the United States was engaged in numerous efforts to assassinate the leaders of different countries and different national liberation movements. And in fact, that has been the policy. What is the, is this, well, you're arguing that the CIA is inept. I mean, so you're arguing the CIA can't do its job, the assigned job, but the fact of the matter is, you look at all of the literature in American history, the serious literature is that the United States government has been involved in carrying out assassinations and regime change and using all kinds of weapons, the latest being targeted assassinations with drones against people and countries that have been considered enemies of the United States. They were once called communists, and all of the communist movements or national liberation movements associated with the Soviet Union were targeted. Nelson Mandela, for instance, was arrested by and with the help of the CIA and spent 27 years in Robbins Island. The idea that Nigel says the CIA is either a pacifist force or just a completely corrupt and inept force, whatever. The point is, the whole world knows the fact that the United States government was and is involved in targeted assassinations. And right now we see the United States government using drone technology without accountability to the U.S. Congress, to lawmakers. The U.S. Congress and the Constitution says it clearly, only Congress can declare war. Politicians can't just declare endless war and then say, well, Brian, we have a weapon of choice that will shield the American public from having to deal with the emotional consequences of war.
Go ahead, Nigel West.
Brian, if you finish the rant, can I just remind you that both the House and the Senate committees have approved the use of unmanned aerial vehicles, and secondly, the UAVs are only deployed into sovereign airspace with the consent and at the invitation of the governments concerned.
Okay,
They
let me ask you
haven't
this.
approved war, and this is warfare. This is warfare, and
Brian
they have
Becker,
not
I'd like
approved
to
war. You can
come
get
in
around
on
it
your
any way
comments.
you want, but it's illegal.
Brian Becker, you talk about this endless war or permanent war, of which the U.S., it seems like very recently, my question first to you is Nigel West, then I'm going to come to you, Brian Becker. It seems like U.S. politicians are talking about an endless war freely. Leon Panetta just talked about 3 decades of war. We have the future presidential candidate, Hillary Clinton, not to mention Leon Panetta. She's also talked about how she's spearheading this endless war doctrine. But that's something the U.S. has been involved with. Let me ask you, Nigel West, how many countries do you think the U.S. is involved with in terms of promoting war, fighting or using war tactics? In how many countries is the U.S. involved currently as we speak?
Well, I'm not sure what your definition is, but in terms of the deployment of U.S. troops overseas, I think it's around 64 countries.
It's 74
the majority
countries.
Of which...
74
Sorry?
countries. 74 countries is the last count.
Well,
Jeremy Scale came
64.
out and said 75. Now, the bigger question here then is, Nigel West, why is the U.S. involved in so many countries, whether covertly or directly?
Well, for very good reasons, just like the United Kingdom and France and plenty of other countries deploy their forces overseas, primarily in a training capacity, giving the opportunity for individual sovereign countries to be able to defend themselves. And where those national interests lie, then the deployment of troops will follow. But there isn't anything clandestine about it. You can go onto the websites and you can see where American troops are in a training capacity or that they're deployed operationally.
Well, Brian Becker, to you, because from the reading that I've done and from obviously what's available out there, it seems like the U.S. doctrine is actually based on a permanent war economy. It started back in the 40s after the Great Depression. They figured, you know, the military machine should keep spinning, factories should make military equipment to keep the economy rolling, and it's just a buildup from decades ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, right. There's kind of 2 basic fundamental pillars to the endless war doctrine. One is that the United States can have military bases in more than 140 countries to project American power, to become a big leverage within the body politic of whatever the occupied country is, the country that is the base. And the second is the ABCs of the U.S. capitalist economy, which is that militarism is a source of endless profit. It's free from competition. The weapons are made, they're destroyed in the course of war, they're then resupplied, taxpayers pay for them. It's a very big subsidy, a kind of corporate welfare in America, and that's the ABCs of endless war. Militarism is good for American business, and you see the American defense contractors, so-called war contractors really, their stocks are soaring right now. Their stocks are going up because this is big business.
Very well, we're going to end with that. Thank you very much for that. Answer Coalition, Brian Becker talking to us from Washington. Thank you very much, Nigel West, intelligence and military historian from London. Thanks so much for tuning in to another edition of The Debate. From me, govt and the entire team in the capital, Tehran, it's goodbye.